All right, folks, and we are live with the issues that you want to know about, which is the election results and how to understand them. If you read different newspapers, you're going to get different images of what the results mean, right? The numbers don't tell the whole story. You got to understand it. And for that, we're going to have our good friend Alex Traiman, who is the Jerusalem bureau chief of Jewish News Syndicate. Shalom, Alex. We're going to wait a few minutes before we actually start the show just to let everybody come in and to join us. So, Alex, thanks for joining us. Are you excited?
It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Okay, we're just going to ask everybody that comes in to let us know how it sounds, how it looks. And when I mean how it looks, I mean to say how it's broadcasting, not how we individually look. Okay, that's we don't need that. We were just talking about
already well documented.
That's right. That's right, Alex. I was baking matzah last night when and I had earbuds in listening to the elections results. That's how excited I was. Were you also?
Well, I wasn't baking matzahs when I was looking at the election results, but certainly no coincidence that you're picking your leaders right before you go into this holiday of freedom. Where before is the nation of Israel was ruled by taskmasters, and instead now they got to choose their own leaders, or in the case of the Exodus from Egypt, Hashem provided a new leader for them that had their best interests in mind. They call it a benevolent dictatorship, potentially a benevolent monarchy. Benevolent monarch of Moses.
That's your Moses, both a monarch and a prophet, and really a man of God who really did have an important part of Jewish leadership, and that is humility and a great love for the people. We have two people saying hello already. Pink Gal Pink says looks good, and Shlomo Algera says looks good so far. Thank you for that vote of confidence, Shlomo. So let us begin our show. Shalom, everybody, and welcome to the Yishai Fleisher Show, broadcasting live from Judea to the world. You're a part of it wherever you are. And we are live right now, both on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Periscope. And so great to be with you on a windy and dusty day here in the Holy Land. And this after a windy and dusty election cycle, election number 4 in 2 years. So it's called Israel Elects 4. And I don't know, I'm not used to that kind of system from growing up in America, where you actually knew when elections was, and it happened every 4 years on a certain date, and then a party won and you knew it. Here it's a little bit different. We have an election that happens when the Knesset decides it happens, up to 4 years, but a lot of times earlier, and most of the times earlier, really. I don't know if it's ever really lasted its full term of 4 years. And moreover, when the election results come in, it's not exactly clear if you have a government yet because there's coalition building. And that's going to be the topic of our discussion today. On the Yishai Fleisher Show, we are honored to welcome Alex Traiman, who's the Jerusalem bureau chief for JNS.org, which is Jewish News Syndicate, which is a great website pumping out intellectual power of both conservatism, the rights of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. Just great news in the Jewish world and in Israel. Alex, you're doing a great job at jns.org. I want everybody to visit. And Alex, I want to talk to you about Israel Elects 4. And let's talk about the results. Because right now, as I've been chatting with some people like Elon Levy, so he's basically saying, look, it's another deadlock. Netanyahu has not managed to make a coalition. It's a loss for him. There's a lack of clarity, and that lack of, as we say in Hebrew, hachra'ah, which means a decisive victory. That lack of decisive victory means that we very well may be going to Israel Elects 5, like Rocky 5000, that type of thing. And sometimes people say, well, the game is endless and the system is broken, and Netanyahu certainly can't pull it out. That is one of the major spins that you're seeing out there. How do you see it?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, definitely Israelis had wanted there to be a very conclusive result, because this cycle of uncertainty in the Israeli political system is really weighing the nation down. People are not happy to be going to the polls every several months, even every 12 months, certainly not every 3 months or 6 months. So people were looking for clarity last night. And when the exit polls first came out with the closing of the voting booths at 10 p.m., it did appear that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had 61 seats of preferred coalition partners. That means the parties that sit on the ideological right and also were committed to sitting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And you need 61 out of 120 seats in the Knesset among the various parties to build a majority coalition. And it appeared as though Netanyahu did have 61. However, as the votes actually started to be counted by the Central Elections Committee as opposed to by the media outlets who were basically taking exit polls, what became clear was that a small Arab party on the fringe of the 3.25% minimum Knesset threshold, the minimum number of votes that you need to get, which is equivalent to about 4 seats, they managed to get across that threshold and may actually get 5 seats. And so what happens is those 5 seats then get subtracted from the rest of the pool. And once that happened, it appeared as though Netanyahu's bloc shrank from about 61 seats to 59 seats, which is too short of that majority. However, it is important to note that this year, due to coronavirus, several drive-through voting booths were set up across the country that anybody could go to and vote at, which is different than the other voting booths that each individual is assigned a specific voting booth that they're supposed to vote at. But because of Corona, basically you had these absentee drive-through voting booths, and there's 450,000 votes that were cast in these booths. And those votes have to be first counted and then second, double checked against the voting records from the standard voting booths to make sure that nobody cast a double vote. This prevents election fraud and double voting. So the 450,000 votes is equivalent to approximately 12 seats. So the final tallies are not in, and things can shift. And it is possible still, potentially, that Netanyahu would get across that 61 minimum number threshold with his preferred partners. If he does, then you have a game over scenario. Netanyahu gets his coalition partners to sign on the dotted line. Obviously, they still have to negotiate things like budget allocations and ministerial appointments. But basically, after that process takes place, you imagine that by the deadline that the partners that had pledged to sit with Netanyahu would sign on the dotted line. Netanyahu would become the prime minister, and you would actually have a stable government. Even though it's narrow, it would be stable because the parties are ideologically aligned and want to sit together. Now, if Netanyahu does not get to the 61, well, then a process of recruitment begins where Netanyahu will have to convince members of other parties that have essentially pledged not to sit in his government to come join his government. And the greatest leverage that he has, aside from potentially great ministerial appointments or budget allocations or things like that, is that the consequences of one or two or more of those Knesset members not coming across and joining a Netanyahu-led government would be a fifth election, which is extraordinarily costly and would further sink the morale of a nation that is losing trust in its parliamentary system.
Okay, well, that blame can go both ways. You could say, well, we've asked you, Netanyahu, get out of the way. We're not going to sit with you, so you're holding up the show. Or the other way, which is, hey, other parties, why are you on a vendetta against one man? You have a similar ideology, for example, the Gideon Sar party and other parties. For example, the Israel Beitenu party of Lieberman. It's like, hey, you're a nationalist. You have a nationalist ideology, so-called right-wing. Why not just join in? That's what the country wants. The country wants you to join in and to have a stable government and move forward. So you could throw that blame around both ways. And so people on the left, I see often throwing that blame towards Netanyahu, saying, get out of the way. We want you out already. You've served your time. You've done your thing. And you certainly have what they call zchuyot, which is achievements. But on the other hand, you also have detractions. You have things that have not been operating properly because it's one man and one way for the last almost 15 years. and so get out of the way. So who's right about this? Is it Netanyahu's got to get out of the way, or do they have to get, or do the other parties that are also associated with nationalism, should they get over their egos? That's the language here in Israel, and join this coalition.
Well, in a parliamentary democracy, really, the people are supposed to decide that. And right now, Prime Minister Netanyahu essentially has 59 Knesset members on the way to 61 that already are agreeing in principle to sit with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And if you go across the spectrum, first of all, and you just look at the election results, first of all, the Likud is the only party in this election that has come out as a potential ruling party. They're the only party anywhere to cross over 30 seats, have 30 or 31 seats according to specific counts, whatever the final numbers will be. The second largest party, which was led by Yair Lapid, who is the head of the opposition, got 18 or 17 seats in comparison. So that's a gap of 14 seats. It's not like you had in the first three elections where the opposition to Netanyahu was consolidated inside this blue and white party, and Likud and blue and white basically went neck and neck 3 elections in a row until Netanyahu eked out a 3 Knesset seat margin over the blue and white in the third election. Here you have a 14-seat gap between Likud and the next largest party with 17 seats. You've never in Israeli history seen a party with 17 seats come forward and say that could be a ruling party. So that's on the one. And then on the other is that Yair Lapid cannot put a coalition together that's anywhere near the 61-seat minimum mandate that you need to form a coalition. You can't even come close because the parties that would potentially sit to oppose Netanyahu are not ideologically similar. In fact, they disagree on most of the key issues of religion.
Right. So like a Gideon Sa'ar party is a nationalist party. They identify themselves as right wing, but at the same time they don't like Netanyahu. But they're not in the same mental set. They don't have the same perspectives as a Labor Party or a Meretz party.
So they have to make a choice. Do we either sit under a Yair Lapid, who they have virtually nothing in common with on an ideological level, and also Lapid does not wield the type of power that is necessary for a ruling party, such that such a coalition would very likely be highly unstable. And Yair Lapid himself is extremely inexperienced when it comes to governance, was finance minister for a year and a half. It was a disaster, and he was fired from that post by Netanyahu for disagreeing with over policies. Or would Gideon Sa'ar say, listen, I tried to beat Netanyahu within the Likud a year ago. I challenged Netanyahu for the first spot in the Likud party. He lost that primary 75 to 25%. Then he broke off from the Likud because he understood that now he's Netanyahu's enemy within the party, and he's not going to get any of the high-profile ministerial posts for challenging Netanyahu's rule. So he broke off, and he tried to form his own party, and he tried to convince the Israeli electorate that he was an alternative candidate could lead from the right, which is where the overwhelming majority of Jewish and Zionist Israelis are today, on the center and the right. When he first announced his candidacy, he initially had a big boost in the polls. He was polling as high as 20 seats. And of course, the Israeli media, who tends to lean to the left and is very anti-Netanyahu in their outlook, and they blame Netanyahu for everything, and they would assist to get him out at any cost. They've proven that over and over again. They put Gideon Sa'ar on television every single night. And what happened was, instead of Sa'ar cementing his image as someone who could replace Netanyahu, that week by week, his poll numbers were going down and down and down.
And why is that? Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that Gideon Sa'ar turned out to be a kind of dud, or at least his party came out to be a kind of dud?
Because in those key interviews, he was not saying anything that differentiated him from Netanyahu. Not only that, it became clear to Israelis that he would not be able to accomplish what Netanyahu was able to accomplish. You know, there's the big leagues and the minor leagues, right? And people on the right understood that despite any of the flaws, and there are many, and despite all the baggage of which there is much, and despite the polarizing personality, and despite the promises that were made that might not have been kept, that Netanyahu is the star of the show. He is the all-star of the team. and the other players are simply supporting cast. And that became clear to many Israelis. So instead of Sar turning around and saying, listen, I tried to defeat Netanyahu. I gave it my best shot. But now I see with only 6 seats to my name that the Israeli voters, and especially the Israeli voters on the right, chose Netanyahu, who got 5 times as many seats as Sar. That Sar should do the right thing for the Israeli public and turn around and say, listen, I gave it my best and I tried to present an alternative. You chose clearly, as you did in the primaries a year ago, and you chose Netanyahu to be the leader of the right-wing camp. And me, as a loyal member of Israel's right wing,
and they former Likudnik, meaning to say, until very recently, grew up in the Likud as a Likud man.
Former Likudnik, former minister that served under Netanyahu, former cabinet secretary that worked for Netanyahu should say, listen, I understand why many people in this country don't like him. I still don't like him, but I have a job to do, and that is to represent the people of Israel. And we have a historic opportunity to build a strong right-wing government, and he can do the right thing and enter a Netanyahu government and get a very high and senior ministerial post for doing that, probably for himself and maybe 1 or 2 other members of his party, and try to affect the policies of an incoming right-wing government. And I think that there's actually a strong likelihood that will happen.
Although he's saying that the voices that are coming out of that party are, no, we're going to be a strong opposition. We're going to serve Israel through opposition. And not going to join the coalition,
of course. I mean, that also drives up the bargaining price.
Right.
So, right now we're getting into a period of intense negotiations. These will not be the prettiest weeks in Israeli politics. But, you just have to look back to a year ago when you had Benny Gantz, who was the leader of a party that had 33 seats compared to Likud's 36. That really was presenting a potential alternative to Netanyahu's reign as the prime minister. And ultimately, when faced with the potential crisis of a 4th rapid-fire election, and then also coupled with the coronavirus pandemic, which just struck the country, you only had the first confirmed cases about 10 days before that election, that Gantz understood that the right thing to do in those circumstances was ultimately to hold his tongue and join a Netanyahu-led government.
And so that's an interesting question about Gantz. Like, was he seen at the end? I mean, there was pretty much across the board sense that this man was not a very capable politician. He may have been a capable general, maybe not, but he was not a very capable politician. On the other hand, some people said that his party would be wiped out, the Blue and White Party, or at least get like only 4 seats, just barely make it across the threshold. But in these elections, he did surprising for that way of thinking. He did surprisingly well and got 8. I think that's 8 right now. So is he a winner or a loser? Is he representing, like you just said, like maybe people were like, listen, this guy did the right thing. He went into the coalition and from their perspective held Netanyahu in check. Or was he a doofus who kind of promised that he wouldn't join a Netanyahu government, went in, joined afterwards, and kind of reneged on his word, and that's why he was once a huge party and is now a pretty marginal party?
Well, I think that there's several truths in what you said. I absolutely believe that Benny Gantz did the honorable thing and stabilized a crisis when that is what was required of him to do. He did that, and even though you could suggest that he essentially got, I don't know what's the better way to say this, he got screwed by Netanyahu. The two had agreed on a rotation arrangement, and Netanyahu found a loophole in their agreement to trigger an election without handing over the reins of power to Gantz. But
which he had promised, right? Which he had promised to give him a rotation
in writing, okay, in a contract that was negotiated with lawyers over like days, day and night to get to that agreement. And Netanyahu found a way to break the agreement. But as you're pointing out, Netanyahu essentially did the will of the voters, because today voters do not see Benny Gantz as prime ministerial material. And I think that his trajectory now looks similar to the trajectory of many other leaders that challenged for the leadership and didn't quite get there, and they don't necessarily fall all the way down to zero in a single election, but often fall down to zero in two elections. So you might see that happen. I think potentially the only party that has managed to sort of buck that trend is the Yesh Atid party, which is led by Yair Lapid, that came out of nowhere in 2013 to get to 19 seats and then sort of fizzled down towards 10, but now has sort of built itself back up as the most viable alternative to Netanyahu at 17 seats. Although, as I mentioned, that 17 seats still falls way behind the Likud's 31.
So let's play out coalition scenarios. First thing, is there any coalition that's not a Likud, or let's put it this way, not a Netanyahu-led coalition? Is there any possibility of that?
Right now, it looks like either Netanyahu builds a coalition or we're getting to another elections. Although in Israeli politics, you have to, at this point, expect the unexpected. Nobody expected that we get into a fourth election. Nobody expected we get into a second election. So
let's game it out. Let's game out the numbers and see, how does Netanyahu make a coalition? He's got his 30 or 31. The ultra-Orthodox did very well.
17 seats between
17 seats, which is a big surprise because they had 15 last time. Am I right, Alex?
That's right.
So that's pretty good, by the way. That's a growth. That just goes to show you that the ultra Orthodox are having children and they're coming of age and they're voting. That's really incredible. So they went up to 17. So let's say 30 plus 17 is 47. Plus a great showing by Bezalel Smotrich's Religious Zionism Party getting 6.
Right.
So that's 47 plus 6 is 53. Plus,
and then the Yamina party of 7.
Right.
That's that comes out to 60. Wait, so that's 30, 39 plus 6 is plus 7 is 46. Plus another 7 is 53. Plus 6 of religious Zionism is 59. So
right.
There's basically 59 seats, Knesset members ready to sign on.
Ostensibly, now you don't know that for sure because the Yamina party, at least the way it's being promoted in the media, is still a question mark. Again, that's a price driving.
Well, they certainly
tactic.
have not ruled out at any point sitting in a Netanyahu-led government, which leads the assumption that if that's what it takes, they will join a Netanyahu-led government. And basically, Netanyahu needs to find now at least 2 Knesset members from among the parties that have pledged not to sit in a Netanyahu-led government. And the most likely of those scenarios comes either from Gideon Sa'ar and his New Hope party, which obviously could drive a fantastic bargain for coming into a Netanyahu-led government, essentially in a kingmaker position. You could imagine in such a scenario, Gideon Sa'ar being a finance minister or getting 2 or 3 or 4 strong ministries, even though he only carries 6 seats into the coalition. But those are the 6 seats necessary to break over the line, so to speak.
Right, but that's if a whole party moves over, sorry.
That's if a whole party comes.
Right, but individuals can also jump over.
That's right. An individual or a faction could break off. And the New Hope performed miserably in the elections, compared to the expectations, and could be that some members of that party might say this was a failed experiment. We took our chance, it didn't work out, and obviously the Likud will welcome these people back with open arms, even though just a few months before they defected and embarrassed the party. But even so, when it comes to building a coalition, if you're the ones that take us across the line, we will welcome you back with open arms and reward you for doing that. And
I heard Miri Regev say just that yesterday as I was driving home from baking matzahs. I heard her on the news saying, hey, come back home to what you really are, which you folks at the Gideon Sa'ar party are really Likudnikim. You are Likudniks. So come on home. That's the language. And we'll take you into a coalition. But something that you and I discussed before the show today, it could be a situation where where suddenly we can find ourselves where it's not expected right now, but it could be that we suddenly have a quite broad coalition. If one of these parties starts breaking, or people starts breaking rank, other people say, you know what am I going to sit now for a few years in the opposition, basically doing nothing, where I could be leading the country and impacting it? And the math could swing the other way, where other people, even from blue and white, Kachol Lavan, for example, could actually jump ship and come on over and make a coalition.
Yeah, I think that the two options, either come from all or part of the New Hope Party led by Gideon Sar, or come from the Blue and White Party led by Benny Gantz. In fact, Benny Gantz ran his whole campaign on the notion that he was the one that kept Netanyahu in check during this last period. So Gantz himself has a choice. Does he either run into the opposition where he is, one of the smaller parties sitting behind Yair Lapid and Avigdor Lieberman in the bottom of the opposition pool? Or does he come on and retain the defense ministry portfolio in a Netanyahu-led government, which is a very high profile and important position, where he can similarly be that thorn in Netanyahu's side and continue to be in the media and potentially strengthen his brand for a future election, and claim that role once again. So that's another possibility. But
it's strengthen the brand or it's weaken the brand, right?
That's the risk. That's the risk.
The risk is that the weakening of the brand is you got to show yourself as an alternative to Netanyahu. And if you go in with him, you're just been co-opted. You've just sold out. You're just another one of the kind of goons, and you just did it for a seat, and you just did it for yourself and for your ego, etc. Or the way you're saying it, which is a kind of language that's more, I think a tad more American in nature, but I say that in a complimentary sense, which is like, okay, there's civic duty. The country needs you. We can't go to fifth elections. And by the way, there is one more option, which is we go to fifth elections, but then the option doesn't stay with we're just going to new elections. Then there's already a talk underneath the surface, which is election reform or system reform of our very government system.
Right. How do you reform the government when you don't have a stable government in place? That's the conundrum. It would take a very strong and stable government to change the system. Yet at the same time, if you're able to form a strong and stable government in the current system, do you really have a motivation to change that system?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But I think you did make an important point before, which is if, let's say, 2 Knesset members crack. And
let's not use that language of crack because I don't think that's. I know what you mean.
To break their promise, right? Of
not joining a Netanyahu government,
and they come in and they join a Netanyahu-led coalition. Well, then all of a sudden the floodgates might open, because the reason why people are maintaining that promise is because they don't want Netanyahu to be the prime minister. But if it becomes clear all of a sudden that no matter what they do, the Netanyahu will be the prime minister, then it's a question again of do I sort of wither in the opposition or do I join the government? And the example of that, Benny Gantz, he ran 3 times, on a promise of never joining a Netanyahu government, and yet he did join that government. Of course, he thought that there was a rotation in place and there was other benefits for joining that government. 15 ministries for his 15 Knesset members. It was an unprecedented deal that he got. But the second he joined, all of a sudden, so joined Amir Peretz of the Labor Party. And Amir Peretz, who had this very bushy mustache for his entire career, and during the campaign did a stunt and shaved off his bushy mustache and said, "Read my lips, I'll never sit with Netanyahu." And the second Gantz came in, the mustache didn't grow back, but Peretz was the labor minister. So promises made the day before the election and even the day of the election may not be the political reality once the negotiations start.
Okay, let's get to a few things that folks are saying out there. First, we have Muhammad Capo from Sarajevo, a great and ancient city that I can't wait to visit one day. So, hi, Muhammad. Thank you so much for joining us. Lou asks a question that I think we already dealt with. Do you see any possibility that Gideon Sars or any members of New Hope will eventually join Likud to form a government? I realize there's an animosity, but they are former Likudniks. I think we discussed that. Yocheved writes, thanks for doing this to help everybody understand these confusing election results. Pink Gal Pink says, so great to have your show this morning here in the USA and get the election update. And then here's two interesting things. First thing, Pink Gal Pink says, can you comment on the Rafeh party? Or Rafeh party. I want to hear what you think about that. And that was the party that ran on an alternative perspective for the coronavirus and how to handle the coronavirus plague, pandemic, however you want to call it. They had a different perspective, but they were kind of shut out, and the media didn't give them a spotlight to talk. I think they were thrown off Facebook as well. There was really a sense that their voice was not heard. On the other hand, there's always a plethora of small, tiny little parties. That's the way it works here in Israel. You can actually register a tiny party that don't get heard of at all, like the Pirates Party and all kinds of other, funny little parties that are trying to make a point. For example, that's right. It was they're rated R, and also there was remember the old pro marijuana party that didn't get very high in the Israeli elections. So tell me about the Rafah party. What's that about?
Right. So the Rapid Party was a party basically that was against the concept of forced or coerced vaccinations. That they were against the fact that the details of the coronavirus cabinets were locked away for 30 years, and the public does not have access to what took place in those coronavirus discussions. That the personal health details of basically all Israelis via the Israeli health system would be sent over to Pfizer in relation to the effectiveness of the vaccine. The feeling that when your iPhone changes the terms and conditions that you have to click accept. And in this case, data that you thought was your personal data was all of a sudden being sold off to a major pharmaceutical company without consent. So they were against many of these things, against extended lockdowns, which essentially ravaged the small businesses and tourism sector. So they definitely were the only voice that was speaking against some of the coronavirus restrictions and regulations.
Where most of the vast majority of the other parties of the kind of more mainstream parties, the ones that you know of even on the right and on the left, they all basically had a sense of agreement, lockdowns, closures, vaccinations, and they really didn't. Nobody really was offering a counter voice to the way that Netanyahu really handled. As only maybe Naftali Bennett, but I didn't quite understand what he was offering other than what he pioneered.
Naftali Bennett was talking about stricter lockdowns, stricter testing, but I think that ultimately, I would say 90+% of Israelis feel that the vaccination campaign and Netanyahu's ability to cut the line, to be first, to receive the vaccines for the entire population, that was a brilliant masterstroke that only a Netanyahu could pull off. And even the real Netanyahu detractors out there, and there are many, they will credit Netanyahu for doing the right thing and getting Israel to the front of the vaccination line. So that's on the ideological level why the Rapeh Party didn't do well. But you did mention, and this is, I think, one of the areas that bear particular notice, is that the party got censored. Like their Facebook page got taken down. At one point, the Israeli Medical Board suspended the license or revoked the medical license of the head of the party, Dr. Aryeh Avni. And when they did that, that could have been a boon for the party in terms of their Knesset bid, because that might have been a hook for media attention. But there was basically essentially a media boycott on interviewing Aryeh Avni, that his message, which was there are other ways of dealing with coronavirus aside from the vaccine, that was essentially censored. So there certainly have been certain issues that I think the Rapeh Party picked up on, that it's a little bit surprising that there aren't other members of some of the mainstream parties, with the exception of the Meretz Party, by the way. The far-left Meretz Party has come out with multiple statements, about maintaining personal freedoms and privacy rights.
And speaking of Meretz, I want to tell you, Alex, I wrote this on Twitter today, and people picked up on it and were like shocked. I'm like, I'm glad that certain elements of the left did well, like relatively well. Like I'm glad that Meretz is in, and people were like, "How could you stand for Meretz? Do you stand for what they stand for?" I'm like, no, I think I stand almost on every issue on the other side. But an ideological party, which Meretz is, which has a kind of, I would say, a pretty Jewish voice of the kind that you hear more maybe in America, of a liberal type of Jewish voice. Like there's something authentic about Meretz, and there was a part of me that's like, well, good. And I sometimes wonder, and I actually tell this to my friends on the left. I'm like, why don't you concentrate on real left issues like environmentalism, like bettering our education, like dealing with welfare for the poor? Like, why don't you like go and attack those issues and stop doing the one horrible issue that you really are very bad at, which is the two-state solution and giving our land to our enemies. Like lay off of that, but get back to classic left issues, and maybe there's a real important voice that you have to add into the Israeli public. But I mean, do you think I'm crazy for saying like there's some part of me that's a little bit happy that Meretz has a place in Israeli democracy and is going to be, heard loudly and vociferously. Also, there's another reason, maybe it's a very selfish reason, but if you're going to accuse the religious Zionism party of being bigoted and Kahanist and all kinds of, words, well, we have a very broad conversation, and there's something called Meretz, and there's the Arab parties, they have their voice. This voice happens to be in the coalition today, but, at least it's there. What do you think about what I'm saying?
Well, first of all, even though we're a Jewish state, which sounds pretty narrow, it's a very diverse state, and we've got 25 volumes of the Talmud, which is all about arguments over the fine points of Jewish law, and so the fact that we would have political disagreements is very Jewish, and in fact, there's something very healthy about the Israeli political system in that the people that vote for these parties are very happy to get into political arguments and ideological arguments with their fellow Israelis that actually disagree with them. That's part of the culture, which is very different than how things have transformed in the United States now, where you've seen families split up if one of the members of the family wanted to vote for Donald Trump and the rest didn't. Jettisoned from the family. Friendships of 30, 40 years ended over political views all of a sudden. In Israel, that's not an issue. And we have 13 parties that crossed the electoral threshold out of 39 parties that had registered as part of this election. At the same time, when you look at the electoral math here and you see that there are 11 different parties now that are going to be in the government that have anywhere between 5 and 9 seats. So you have a leading party, a ruling party, Likud, with 30 seats. Then you have a second-tier party, Yesh Atid, with 17 seats, which is probably going to be the head of the opposition. And then you have 11 parties between 5 and 9 seats. And each one of these parties represents a potential kingmaker or deal breaker in the coalition math. So in a sense, the inability to make a working and a stable coalition is potentially due to the fact that there are so many of these small parties, each with their own very narrow agenda, and they don't feel like they have to necessarily do what's right for the larger electorate, aside from those very small number of voters that voted for them.
That's right. And there's also no geographic representation in Israel, which means that you don't have to answer to a constituent that's localized, and then you could find them very easily. Somebody could say, "Hey, I voted for you." Well, go on and prove it. I don't know if you voted for me or not, and I don't know if I'm beholden to you or not. And there's
no direct representation either in terms of the legislature. I mean, in all of these parties, the only 2 parties that had a primary. Well, actually, it's not even true, because the Likud, which traditionally has primaries,
lost you for a second there. Alex, you're a little bit frozen.
Yeah, the only party.
Are you guys watching this right now, seeing Alex frozen? If so, we'll see if we can get him back. Sometimes I find that removing somebody.
I hear you.
Alex, if you do hear me, do come back into the link that I sent. Oh, there he is. Hold on one second. Oh, Alex, you're back.
Thanks.
Nicely done.
I was never lost. I heard you the whole time.
Oh, okay.
But where were we?
I don't know. Let's read what Rob
Oh, I
says. He
was going to
says,
say that there's no direct representation even in this election. The Likud party, which typically has a primary, canceled their primary because they had a primary just a year ago before the third election. So of all these parties, of the 120 members of the Knesset, I think the Labor Party with their 7 seats was the only party to have a legitimate primary before the elections. And when you go to the voting booth as a voter, you see the name of a party on a card and you pick the party that you want to represent you in the government. And you take that party as a package deal, which means that you can almost never replace the number 2 or the number 3 member of a list. There's no way to get a bad Knesset member out without getting the entire party out. So
right.
you don't really have direct representation, and you also don't pick the prime minister, right? It will be up now to Netanyahu or any of the other members of the Knesset to get 61 other Knesset members to join them, and that process is what will crown the prime minister. So even though it's a parliamentary election, you don't exactly have direct representation, not for your parliamentarians and not for your prime minister.
It is indeed a strange system, and there is murmurings in Israel that it's time to make, let's call it like a constitutional convention, a gathering of Israelis to rethink our system. In the meantime, we'll still be playing the game that's at hand right now, which is coalition building for this 24th Knesset. Alex Traiman, great job. You are the Jerusalem Bureau Chief for jns.org, which is a Jewish News Syndicate. And is a great online resource for daily news in the Jewish world, in Israel, and important things to the Middle East and globally. Thank you so much for joining us. And as Jay White says, he says, Pesach Sameach to you guys and your families. May we all be redeemed this Pesach. Much love. And that's what I'm sending to you, Alex. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Yishai.
All right, awesome stuff with Alex Traiman. And you are listening to the Yishai Fleisher Show. And this is also part of my larger podcast. So you are definitely invited to join my podcast, which is at yishaifleisher.com or at any of the podcast servers. Just type in Yishai Fleisher Israel podcast and you'll find it. And this week we're going to have what we just heard right now, which is Alex Traiman. But we're also going to have Rabbi Shimshon Neidel on halachot, the laws of this special Pesach, because we have a Saturday night, a Motzei Shabbat, a Saturday night Seder. Saturday night Seder, that's what I want to call it. And also we have, I think, we'll see how long everything is, but I think I'm going to include also my discussion with Sergeant Benjamin Anthony of the Miriam Institute about settle for more. What are Jewish rights in Judea? So that's all part of the podcast. And if you're listening on podcast right now, thank you so much for being with me. Write me an email, yishai@yishaifleisher.com, yishai@yishaifleisher.com. And I want to thank the folks that really make this happen. If it's Ben Bresky, if it's Tabitha, if it's Yocheved, if it's Moshe Herman, these are folks, and our friend Lou, who is online with us right now and wishes us a Chag Sameach. Thank you so much. For making the show happen. And also we have awesome sponsors. For example, Prohibition Pickle. Okay, Prohibition Pickle makes the best settler salami and just the good stuff that makes Shabbos fun, Shabbat fun. I love all the spicy stuff that is made in that. It's a restaurant, it's takeout, it's deli, it's Ashkenazi, it's Shabbos. And it's here in Tzomah Gush and Gush Etzion, but also delivers all across the country. So if you want to support your favorite show host, your favorite friend, just look up Prohibition Pickle on Facebook or on Instagram and just order, and it makes all the difference in the world. It tricks out your kiddush. We also have Jerusalem Salves. They make fabulous, JerusalemSalves.com. They make fabulous creams that make your body and your soul. That's right. It's actually, this cream is good for your soul because it brings the land of Israel to you, to your body. .com, and just type in coupon code Yishai, get 10% off. So too, get 10% off at Aleph Mail, which will make your beard look awesome and be 100% organic, non-toxic Judean masculinity, 100% organic, non-toxic Judean masculinity, and it's really kind of cool. And if you type into Aleph Male Yishai when you check out, you also get 10% off. And so too, you're going to get 10% off. No, actually 12% off at Blessed by Israel, blessedbyisrael.com. And they make they get you products from the land of Israel all over the world. Even if you're in Antarctica, shipping will probably cost a little bit more. So go to Blessed by Israel for great Israeli products and type in coupon code Yishai. Bang, 10% off right there. And they're great sponsors of the show. So too are the Tchelet folks, Tekhelet, Tchelet.com. That's the folks that make the blue string, right? The biblical blue string, which is back. Okay, it's back. It's biblical and it's back. How about that? It's biblical and it's back. I think I like that. That's a very easy slogan. Biblical and back. And we also have new friends that make a tremendous difference in our life and in other people's lives, including, hold on one second, including an amazing energy company that will make you have clean energy in your business, which is Energy CX. That's all across the United States. If you're listening there, in all 50 states, synagogues, schools, businesses, retail, industrial, makes your light and electricity kosher, and saves you a lot of money as well. They're very smart about how they do it. That's energycx.com. So check them out. That is a way to make the world a better place, make the world just a bit of a better place. And there is one more that I do want to discuss today. Oh, yeah, jewishpress.com. The good folks at jewishpress.com, just like JNS, they make a tremendous service to all of us by aggregating and providing the news of the day. I love their email, Jewish Express, which is part of jewishpress.com. My good friend Steven runs it, so check that out. They do a great job. And finally, silksalon.co.il, silksalon.co.il. As we speak, at this very moment, Malka and Leah, my beloved wife and daughter, are at Silk Salon right now. I am not exaggerating. They're right now getting their nails done for the Chag, for the holiday, and you too can either get your nails done or all the other stuff that they do there, which is manicures, pedicures, facials, bridal packages, bat mitzvahs, much, much more. Be beautiful, be awesome, be beautiful, Judea. That's what we say. Or get a package for a friend or I don't know. You know, a great way to send a gift, which is going to silksalon.co.il. So that's right. And says Pink Al Pink, who I think just by her name probably has a sense of the importance of sometimes getting a manicure or pedicure. I'm not making any aspersions I'm not making any remarks here that are inappropriate. I'm just saying that probably as her comment shows. That she understands the importance of this sometimes. So she says, good for them, smiley face, you're absolutely right. Sometimes you need a little heaven on earth, a personal oasis, and that's silksalon.co.il. And there's many other sponsors as well, including the Land of Israel Network, which is the home of our show, and YishaiFleisher.com, which is where you can donate and be part of it. Be part of all of our projects, because we have many projects, including supporting the Jewish communities of Judea and Samaria, which especially the outlying folks who are really holding on to the land of Israel. So you can go to YishaiFleisher.com and donate. And our project at strengthening presence of the Jewish people in the heartland by creating an Israel Biblical Highway. That's a renaming project that we have going on right now. You could write to me and I'll tell you more about it, but we're in progress with a great new website and a real way to adopt a biblical highway, that is. So it's a great way to connect. That's all at YishaiFleisher.com. And you know what? How could I forget? Last but not least, HebronFund.org. And the HebronFund.org is the organization that supports the Jewish community of Hebron, where I have the incredible merit to do my day job, my real job, which is to support the forefathers and mothers in tourism to the town of Hebron and make sure that it's safe and strong and beautiful and protective of our heritage, which is the founding heritage of our peoplehood. and that is found at hebronfund.org. So all those folks make this show happen. I want to thank all of you because you are the number one folks, because you draw it out of me. It is my great blessing to be part of your life, even in the tiniest little way. And finally, how can we not thank the God of Israel, who is bringing the Jewish people back to the land of Israel, and therefore not only redeeming the Jews, but making this world more with his presence. Because when his presence resides in Jerusalem, that means that his presence is more in this world, because he chooses to reveal himself more in this way, and that means that we are living in great times. Therefore, don't be surprised that the dark forces want to dark everything out. That's because they cannot stand the light of God, which is permeating this world like never before. So, all right, folks, I want to wish you a Chag Sameach, a happy holiday. If you're listening on podcast, please stay tuned for Rabbi Shimshon Nadel coming up next, and then right after that, my discussion with Sergeant Benjamin Anthony of the Miriam Institute. God bless, lots of love, lots of luck, lots of revelation, lots of seeing God everywhere in your life, and of course, blessings from the land of blessings, and shalom.